Nearly 2 years after Matt Lauer was fired from the Today Show, disgusting new details about his alleged behavior are coming out. The woman whose accusations helped end his career is going public, and we should warn you, details of her account.
For decades, Matt Lauer was one of the most recognizable faces on morning television, trusted by millions of viewers every day. But in a matter of hours, the career he built over decades collapsed after shocking allegations changed everything. What happened after the cameras stopped rolling? The headlines faded, and one of television's biggest stars disappeared from public life. Behind the scandal was a complicated story of fame, consequences, isolation, and reinvention. This is the untold journey of where Matt Lauer went, how his life changed forever, and the questions that still surround his life today. Before the controversy, before the headlines, and before millions of viewers watched his career disappear almost overnight, Matt Lauer was one of the most recognizable and trusted personalities in American television. For more than 2 decades, his voice became part of people's daily routines. Every morning, as families prepared for work and school, Lauer sat behind the desk of NBC's Today Show, interviewing presidents, movie stars, athletes, and world leaders. He was not just a television host. He was considered one of the most influential journalists in the country. But his journey to that position was far from guaranteed. Matt Lauer was born on December 30th, 1957, in New York City. Unlike many television personalities who seemed destined for fame, his early path was filled with uncertainty. He attended Ohio University, where he studied communications and began developing an interest in broadcasting. His first steps into television were not glamorous. Instead of starting at a major network, Lauer worked behind the scenes and took entry-level opportunities that allowed him to learn the business from the ground up. His first major experience came through local television. Like many aspiring broadcasters, he moved between smaller markets, taking on different roles and learning how to connect with audiences. He worked as a reporter, producer, and anchor, slowly building the skills that would eventually make him a national figure. During the 1980s and early 1990s, Lauer's career began gaining momentum. His ability to conduct interviews with confidence and maintain a calm presence on camera made him stand out. Television executives saw someone who could handle serious conversations while still appearing approachable to everyday viewers. That balance became one of his greatest strengths. When Lauer joined NBC's Today Show in 1994 as a news anchor, few could have predicted how significant that moment would become. The program was already one of the most important morning shows in television history, and Lauer was stepping into a highly competitive environment where personalities could make or break a network's success. Over time, he became a central figure on the broadcast. Viewers watched him interview some of the biggest names in the world. He questioned political leaders during important moments in history, challenged celebrities during controversial situations, and covered major events that shaped public conversations. His style was direct but polished, serious but conversational. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Matt Lauer had become a television powerhouse. The Today Show was dominating morning television, and Lauer was one of the biggest reasons behind its success. His familiar presence created a sense of reliability. For many viewers, turning on NBC in the morning felt incomplete without seeing him behind the desk. With success came enormous influence. Behind the scenes, Lauer became one of NBC's most valuable employees. His role extended beyond simply reading headlines or conducting interviews. He represented the network's image, and his ability to attract viewers made him a key part of NBC's business strategy. But fame at that level came with a complicated reality. The more powerful Lauer became, the more carefully his public image was managed. He was portrayed as the professional journalist who could handle any conversation, the experienced broadcaster who represented trust and credibility. Yet as time passed, questions about the culture inside major media organizations began to emerge, especially regarding the relationships between powerful executives, hosts, and employees. At the height of his career, however, few people questioned Lauer's position. He appeared almost untouchable. His interviews became viral moments before social media dominated the news cycle. His salary reportedly placed him among the highest-paid figures in television. His influence reached far beyond the studio, making him one of the faces of American journalism. But the same success that elevated him to extraordinary heights would eventually make his downfall even more dramatic. Because behind the carefully created image of the unstoppable morning television star was a reality that many viewers never saw, and as his power continued to grow, the distance between Matt Lauer's public reputation and private life became impossible to ignore. And soon, the questions that had remained hidden would begin to surface. By the early 2000s, Matt Lauer had reached a level of success that very few television personalities ever experience. He was no longer simply a morning show host. He had become a symbol of NBC itself. His face was associated with breaking news, major interviews, and some of the biggest moments in American television. For millions of viewers, Lauer represented stability. Every weekday morning, he appeared on Today with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how to control a conversation. Whether he was interviewing a Hollywood celebrity promoting a new movie, questioning a politician during an election season, or reporting from the scene of a major event, Lauer had developed a reputation for being prepared, professional, and persistent. His interviewing style became one of his trademarks. He was known for asking difficult questions and pushing guests beyond carefully prepared answers. Sometimes those interviews created controversy, but they also reinforced the image that he was a serious journalist willing to challenge powerful people. That reputation helped him become one of the most recognizable broadcasters of his generation. As Today continued to compete for the top position in morning television, Lauer became one of NBC's biggest assets. The show's success was not just about news, it was about connection. Viewers invited the personalities into their homes every morning, and Lauer became a familiar presence for people across the country. Behind the scenes, his influence within the network continued to expand. Lauer was reportedly involved in important decisions about the direction of the program. His opinion carried significant weight, and his status placed him among the most powerful figures in television news. In an industry where visibility often equals influence, he had achieved both. But being at the center of such a powerful platform also created intense scrutiny. The world of network television has always been built around carefully crafted images. Hosts are expected to appear confident, relatable, and trustworthy. The audience sees the finished product, the polished interviews, the friendly conversations, and the moments designed for public consumption. What viewers rarely see is what happens behind the scenes. During Lauer's years at NBC, the entertainment and media industries were beginning to face deeper conversations about workplace culture and the behavior of powerful figures. Although many of those discussions became more public years later, questions about the relationships between authority, fame, and accountability were slowly becoming impossible to ignore. At the time, however, Lauer remained one of television's most protected and valuable personalities. His career continued to reach new heights. He covered major international events, traveled around the world for special reports, and interviewed some of the most influential people on the planet. From presidents to royalty, Lauer was given access that reflected his importance within the media landscape. But with that level of access came another reality: the expectations placed on someone with enormous power. The higher someone rises, the more difficult it becomes for the public to separate the person from the image. For years, Matt Lauer's image was carefully maintained. He was the respected journalist, the morning television favorite, and the trusted face millions believed they knew. However, behind every public persona is a private story. And as Lauer's career reached its peak, cracks began appearing beneath the surface. Stories, rumors, and concerns that had remained outside the public eye would eventually become part of a much larger conversation about power, responsibility, and the culture inside one of America's most famous television programs. The man viewers thought they knew was about to be examined in a completely different way. And the event that followed would not just end a career, it would change the entire conversation around television journalism. For years, Matt Lauer had been one of the most familiar faces on American television. He was a person millions of people welcomed into their homes every morning, someone whose career represented success, influence, and stability. But in November 2017, that carefully built image collapsed in a matter of hours. The announcement came as a shock to viewers across the country. On November 29, 2017, NBC revealed that Lauer had been terminated from Today following a detailed complaint from a colleague about inappropriate sexual behavior. The network stated that the complaint represented a serious violation of workplace standards, and officials said they had determined there was enough information to take immediate action. The news was unexpected. Just one day earlier, Lauer had appeared on television as he had for years, sitting behind the familiar desk, conducting interviews, and performing the role audiences had become accustomed to seeing. Then suddenly, one of the most powerful personalities in morning television was gone. The speed of his removal showed how dramatically the media landscape had changed. At the time, the entertainment and news industries were facing a wave of allegations against powerful figures as part of the broader #MeToo movement. Across Hollywood, journalism, politics, and corporate America, individuals who had long held positions of influence were being accused of misconduct, and organizations were being forced to confront workplace cultures that had often gone unchallenged. NBC's decision regarding Lauer became one of the most significant moments in that movement. Following the announcement, additional allegations and reports emerged about his behavior during his years at the network. Several women came forward with accusations, while others described concerns about the environment surrounding him. Lauer responded by acknowledging that some of the claims had merit while disputing aspects of certain allegations. The public reaction was immediate. For many viewers, the situation created a sense of disbelief. How could someone who had spent decades presenting himself as a trusted journalist become involved in such serious controversy? That question became one of the biggest discussions surrounding the scandal. Colleagues who had worked alongside Lauer were forced to confront a complicated reality. They had known him as a professional figure, someone who was successful and respected within the industry. But the allegations introduced a different perspective, one that challenged the image people had seen on television for years. The impact extended beyond Lauer himself. The scandal forced NBC and other media organizations to examine how complaints were handled, how powerful employees were monitored, and whether certain individuals had received different treatment because of their status. For Today, the loss was enormous. Lauer had been one of the program's defining personalities for more than 20 years. Replacing someone with that level of recognition was not simply a staffing decision. It was the end of an era for one of television's most famous broadcasts. But perhaps the biggest change was personal. In a single moment, Matt Lauer went from being one of the most visible people in America to someone removed from public life. The interviews stopped. The appearances disappeared. The constant presence on morning television was replaced by silence. The man who once asked others difficult questions suddenly became the subject of the questions himself. And as the initial shock faded, a new mystery emerged. What happens when someone who has spent decades building a public identity suddenly loses everything connected to that identity? Where does a person go after their career, reputation, and place in popular culture have been completely transformed? For Matt Lauer, the answer would mean stepping away from the spotlight and entering a life that looked completely different from the one millions of viewers had known. When Matt Lauer disappeared from television, it was unlike anything most viewers had ever witnessed. For more than 2 decades, he had been a constant presence in American households. His schedule had revolved around early mornings, live broadcasts, interviews, and public appearances. Then, almost instantly, that entire world vanished. The cameras stopped. The interviews stopped. The carefully managed image that had defined his career was no longer something he could control. After leaving NBC, Lauer largely withdrew from public attention. Unlike many disgraced public figures who attempt immediate comebacks or seek media appearances to defend themselves, he chose a much quieter path. He moved away from the daily spotlight and focused on his personal life, spending more time away from the television industry that had once defined him. For someone who had spent decades surrounded by attention, the sudden absence of public visibility represented a dramatic change. The world had known Matt Lauer as a broadcaster. People recognized his voice, his interviewing style, and his presence on Today. But outside the studio, he now had to navigate a completely different reality, one where his name was no longer connected to success, but instead to controversy. The public conversation surrounding him continued long after his departure. Many viewers questioned how someone with such a respected position could have been involved in allegations of misconduct. Others debated issues of accountability, workplace culture, and whether powerful figures in media had been protected for too long. The scandal became part of a larger national discussion. But away from the headlines, Lauer's personal circumstances were also changing. His departure from NBC came during a period of significant transition in his private life. His marriage to model and television personality Annette Roque ended after years of public attention surrounding their relationship. Reports suggested that the former couple reached a divorce settlement, marking another major change in Lauer's life after the collapse of his career. The contrast between his past and present became striking. There was a time when Lauer traveled internationally for interviews, attended major events, and was surrounded by celebrities, executives, and political figures. Now, he was living a far more private existence, away from the television world where he had once held enormous influence. However, disappearing from television did not mean escaping public discussion. Every few months, stories would appear about his life after NBC. Reports focused on where he was living, how he was spending his time, and whether he had any plans to return to public life. Each appearance or mention reminded people that although he had stepped away from the spotlight, his story remained a subject of interest. The question became whether someone like Matt Lauer could ever move beyond such a public downfall. For some former celebrities and media personalities, time away allowed them to rebuild their reputations. Others remained permanently associated with the controversy that ended their careers. In Lauer's case, the challenge was even greater because his entire identity had been connected to trust and credibility. The foundation of his career was journalism, and journalism depends on public confidence. The scandal did not just affect his job, it changed the way many people viewed the years before it. Moments that once represented professionalism and success were now reconsidered through a different lens. But while the public continued debating his legacy, Lauer was attempting to create a life outside the world that had made him famous. He reportedly spent more time focused on family, property, and personal interests rather than chasing another television opportunity. The man who once lived according to a broadcast schedule was now living far away from the demands of daily television. Yet one question remained unanswered. Was this disappearance permanent? Or was Matt Lauer quietly preparing for another chapter? Because even after years away from the cameras, the possibility of a comeback, or at least some form of public return, continued to follow him. And the decisions he made during this private period would reveal whether he was trying to rebuild his life, protect his legacy, or simply leave his former world behind forever. After losing the career that had defined him for more than 2 decades, Matt Lauer entered a chapter of his life that was almost the complete opposite of the world he once knew. The constant pressure of live television, the demands of network executives, and the attention of millions of viewers were replaced by something much quieter, a life away from the cameras. But stepping away from public life did not erase the impact of what happened. For years, Lauer had been known primarily through his professional identity. Viewers knew him as the man behind the Today desk, the interviewer who questioned world leaders and celebrities, and the broadcaster whose face appeared on television screens every morning. Very few people knew the person outside that carefully constructed role. After the scandal, that separation between public image and private reality became one of the biggest questions surrounding him. What was Matt Lauer like when he was no longer performing for an audience? Reports about his post-NBC life painted a picture of someone who had dramatically reduced his public presence. He spent more time away from major media events and focused on personal matters rather than rebuilding his television career. The lifestyle that once revolved around deadlines and broadcasts shifted toward a much more private existence. For someone who had spent years surrounded by attention, that adjustment was likely enormous. Television had provided structure, recognition, and purpose. Every morning had a schedule. Every interview had preparation. Every appearance reinforced his place in the public world. After 2017, all of that disappeared. The transition forced Lauer to confront a question many famous people eventually face after leaving the spotlight. Who are you when the thing that made you famous is gone? For some celebrities, the answer is a second career. For others, it is a public apology tour or an attempt to reshape their image. But Lauer took a different approach, largely avoiding interviews and keeping his life away from public discussion. That silence created even more curiosity. Whenever a person with such a recognizable name disappears, people naturally want to know what is happening behind the scenes. Some wondered whether he was trying to repair relationships, others questioned whether he hoped to return to television, and some debated whether his absence represented accountability or simply an attempt to avoid attention. Meanwhile, those closest to him were experiencing their own changes. The scandal affected not only Lauer but also the people connected to him. His family life became part of the public conversation, and his divorce from Annette Roque marked another major turning point. After years of being viewed as a successful television couple, their relationship ended during one of the most difficult periods of Lauer's life. The collapse of his professional world and changes in his personal life happened at nearly the same time. Together, they created a complete transformation. The man who once appeared to have everything, fame, wealth, influence, and a respected career, suddenly found himself rebuilding from the ground up. But rebuilding a life after public disgrace is far more complicated than simply stepping away. A person can leave television, move locations, and avoid interviews, but reputation follows wherever they go. Every future opportunity, every public appearance, and every discussion about their name remains connected to what happened before. For Matt Lauer, the biggest challenge was not only changing his circumstances. It was facing the fact that his legacy had changed forever. Before the scandal, his career was often discussed as a story of ambition and achievement. Afterward, his name became connected to a much larger conversation about power, responsibility, and the consequences faced by influential people. Yet, even after years away from television, another question continued to follow him. Could someone whose career ended in such a dramatic way ever find a path back into public life? Or had Matt Lauer become one of those rare figures whose greatest achievements would always be overshadowed by the moment that ended everything? The answer would depend not only on whether audiences were willing to look forward, but whether they believed he had truly changed. For most television personalities, a career ending is usually a gradual process. Ratings decline, opportunities disappear, and audiences slowly move on. But Matt Lauer's exit from NBC was completely different. His career did not fade away, it stopped suddenly. One day, he was one of the most powerful figures in broadcast journalism. The next, he was no longer part of the conversation happening inside the studio where he had spent decades building his reputation. That dramatic fall created a question that continues to surround many public figures after major scandals. Can someone ever truly return? For Matt Lauer, the possibility of a comeback has always been complicated. A return to television would not simply mean finding another hosting position. His previous role depended on something much more valuable than popularity: trust. Morning television personalities become part of people's daily lives, and audiences often develop a personal connection with the people they see every morning. When that trust is damaged, rebuilding it becomes extremely difficult. The media landscape had also changed significantly after Lauer's departure. The rise of the #MeToo movement transformed how companies, audiences, and networks viewed allegations against powerful individuals. Organizations became more cautious about protecting employees, and viewers became more aware of the influence that major personalities held behind the scenes. In this new environment, a public comeback required more than talent. It required accountability. Many former celebrities and media figures who faced controversy attempted to return by explaining their actions, giving interviews, or rebuilding their public image. Some succeeded in creating new opportunities, while others discovered that audiences were unwilling to separate their past behavior from their future work. Lauer's situation was particularly challenging because his entire career was built around communication. He spent years asking other people questions. Now, any potential return would require him to answer difficult questions about himself. What did he learn? How did he change? Why should the public view him differently? Those questions have remained central to discussions about his future. Unlike some public figures who aggressively sought attention after controversy, Lauer largely stayed away from television appearances. He did not attempt to recreate the role he once had or immediately seek another major media platform. That decision created different interpretations. Some viewed his absence as a sign that he understood the seriousness of what happened and was choosing a private life. Others argued that disappearing from public view avoided the difficult conversations necessary for rebuilding trust. The debate reflected a larger issue about public forgiveness. When someone famous makes a serious mistake, how should society respond? Should a person be permanently defined by their worst moment, or should they have the opportunity to change and move forward? There is no simple answer. For viewers who once welcomed Lauer into their homes every morning, the controversy represented a personal disappointment. The person they thought they knew was suddenly connected to allegations that challenged the image they had trusted. But for others, the story represented a broader conversation about accountability and the responsibility that comes with power. Years after his departure, Lauer remained a fascinating example of how quickly fame can disappear. His story showed that even the most successful careers can be vulnerable when public trust is lost. It also demonstrated that reputation, once damaged, is one of the hardest things to rebuild. Still, questions about his future continued. Could he ever appear on television again? Would audiences watch? Would networks consider giving him another opportunity? Or had the world of morning television moved on without him? Perhaps the biggest challenge for Matt Lauer was not finding another job. It was accepting that the career he once had might never exist again. Because sometimes the hardest part of losing everything is not the fall itself. It is discovering that the world you left behind continued moving forward without you. And as time passed, one final question remained about his legacy. When history looks back at Matt Lauer, will people remember the decades of success, the scandal that ended it all, or something more complicated in between? Matt Lauer's story is one of the most dramatic examples of how quickly public perception can change. For decades, he represented success in American television. He was a journalist who interviewed presidents, entertainers, and global leaders. He was a familiar face during some of the biggest moments in modern broadcasting. But today, his name carries a much more complicated meaning. His legacy is no longer defined by one thing. Instead, it exists somewhere between remarkable professional achievements and a scandal that permanently changed the way many people view him. Before everything changed, Lauer's career was considered one of the most successful in television history. Few broadcasters managed to maintain such a long run at the top of a major network program. His ability to connect with audiences, handle difficult interviews, and remain relevant through changing eras of media made him one of NBC's most valuable personalities. For many years, he represented the power of morning television. But the events of 2017 changed the conversation completely. The allegations against him forced viewers, colleagues, and the entire media industry to reconsider how powerful personalities were treated and protected. His downfall became part of a larger moment when many institutions were forced to examine the cultures that existed behind the scenes. In that sense, the story of Matt Lauer became bigger than Matt Lauer himself. It became a symbol of a changing era. The television industry that once celebrated personalities above all else began facing difficult questions about responsibility, leadership, and accountability. The same qualities that had helped someone rise to the top, confidence, influence, and authority, were now being examined from a different perspective. But beyond the headlines and debates, there was also a personal story. A person who once lived in front of millions of viewers was suddenly living almost entirely outside public attention. The daily routine of television was replaced by privacy. The constant recognition was replaced by distance. For someone who had spent most of his adult life being seen, becoming invisible was its own kind of transformation. Yet the question of legacy is rarely simple. History often remembers people through contradictions. Some figures are remembered for their greatest accomplishments. Others are remembered for their greatest failures. And some remain forever connected to both. Matt Lauer's career cannot be erased. The interviews, broadcasts, and years of television success all happened. They remain part of his professional history. But the controversy cannot be separated from that history either. The challenge of looking back at his story is understanding how both realities can exist at the same time. A person can have an extraordinary career and still face serious consequences for their actions. A public figure can create memorable moments while also becoming part of a difficult national conversation. That complexity is what keeps stories like his alive. Years after leaving NBC, Matt Lauer remains a subject of curiosity because his rise and fall represent something many people find difficult to understand. How someone can reach the highest levels of success and still lose everything. His story is not only about television. It is about fame, power, trust, and the fragile nature of reputation. The question of what happened to Matt Lauer may seem simple, but the answer is far more complicated than just saying he lost his job. He lost the identity he had spent decades building. He lost the position that made him famous. And he became a reminder that no amount of success can completely protect someone from the consequences of their actions. Today, Matt Lauer lives far away from the spotlight that once followed him everywhere. Whether his story is finished or whether another chapter eventually appears remains unknown. But one thing is certain. The man who once controlled the questions on television became the subject of one of the biggest questions in modern media. How does someone recover when the entire world sees them differently? And perhaps the most revealing part of Matt Lauer's story is not what happened when the cameras were on him, but what happened after they finally turned away.